Hello, I'm Terry Georgiou from the London Psychology Collective. Today we have with us Dr Patricia Bonnici, and we'll be speaking about Jean-Paul Sartre and how some of his ideas can apply to everyday life. Welcome, Patricia.
Hi, Terry.
So, would you like to start by telling us a little about Sartre?
Sure. So he was born in 1905 in Paris. It's quite interesting. He was quite a cute kid, with these big hair, golden curls, and he, people often told him that he was cute as a child. And his father died when he was very young, a 3-year-old, and his mother remarried, and he hated the man that his mother remarried, so he had a very difficult relationship with his stepfather. And eventually, when he's around kind of 7, mother stopped dressing him how they used to dress almost like little girls, and she cut off his curls. And he said that he went home and he looked in the mirror and he saw how ugly he really was. And this was something that Sartre always carried along with him, the fact that he was not very good looking at all, and this was part of the reason that his intellect became quite so important, because he felt that this was part of the things that he really had. Anyway, he was very smart. He eventually goes to Paris. He studies at the Sorbonne. He's one of the best students there. He's first in class in the final exams. This is also, and as an aside, where he meets Simone de Beauvoir, which starts a lifelong relationships with her. He was never very ambitious in terms of what jobs he wanted to do, because he always knew he wanted to write. And so he wanted a job which would give him enough money, but where he could have a lot of time to write. So he does eventually start teaching at a school outside of Paris. But eventually the Second World War breaks out, and he gets sent off. He wasn't a soldier, but he works as a meteorologist, and had a very difficult job of inflating balloons and releasing them into the air and seeing which direction the wind was going, so that the soldiers would know which direction the wind was on that particular day. So obviously he had an awful lot of time to read, and he read Heidegger during the war, so he reads Being and Time, and it got him thinking a lot about a lot of things. Eventually he becomes a prisoner of war, and he's in a POW camp for a while. He wasn't there for very long, but it made him rethink a lot of his earlier philosophy, because he was already writing books by this point in time, and freedom was already a very key theme for him, but he was already starting to rethink some of this. He managed to escape from the prisoner of war camp. He returns to Paris, and this starts sort of very long career of being very subversive. So from that point in time, he kind of joined the resistance, and he was very much about keeping nationalism going in France, and he published in kind of underground sort of papers, and he carries this on throughout the rest of his life. So at different points in time, he was involved in Marxism, and not quite communism, Marxism was what he would have said, and also like the student revolts in the 1960s. He was very active. He wrote for the students. He went out on the streets with the students. He was arrested quite a few times. He was offered a Nobel Prize, which he refused, because he always considered himself to be very sort of non-conformist, and by accepting the prize, it would really have defied, he felt, that the whole point of his life, the whole point of his writing. So in that sense, he was also quite committed to his writing.
And tell us about one of Sartre's main points, one of his ideas, this idea of bad faith.
Yes. So I think this links in a lot with his idea of freedom. Sartre had what is generally by other people called a radical definition of freedom. He saw humans to be as purely 100% free, at least in a lot of his early work. Later on, some of this started to change, particularly as he got more involved with Marxism. But quite early on, he felt that we could choose to be anything that we wanted to be, and he has kind of this motto of existence precedes essence. So he links this to, we are not born with a plan, and in some ways he links this to the fact that he doesn't believe that God exists. So if there's no God, then God didn't give us a life plan, and therefore we have nothing to live up to. So we come into the world as empty beings, and then we very much choose our fate, which is what he saw that he did. And he felt the fact that after he didn't have a father, or his father died, in fact was liberation for him, because since he hated the stepfather, then he didn't have to follow in his footsteps, and he didn't have to live up to his expectations or his wishes. He was free to go out into the world and become whatever he wanted to become. So this idea was very, very important for him, that we had choices and we could always choose what we wanted to be. Yet he felt that people constantly denied this or deceived themselves by saying that actually they weren't free, by saying that they had no choice and they had to be a certain way because either there was some essence to them or because this is what was expected of them. And he starts linking this with ideas of bad faith. And Sartre, I think, is quite original in the way he writes philosophy, because he was also a writer of novels and a playwright. So he has an easier style, and he writes with vignettes. So when he talks about bad faith, he has a series of vignettes, and perhaps the most popular two is the young lady in the cafe. So she's there with a man, and she knows that the man likes her. She knows that he's interested in her. Yet she doesn't really want to make a decision. She doesn't want to commit either way, by either saying, I'm not interested in you, or by saying, yes, let's take this relationship forward. However, while they're in the cafe, and she has her hand on the table, the man reaches across the table and he puts his hand on top of hers. And Sartre says, well, this is the moment of decision now, because if she withdraws her hand, then she's made it quite clear that she's not interested. Yet if she leaves her hand there, then she's accepting his advances and he can carry on. And he says, and that's the precise point where the young lady becomes all intellect and she starts talking about something, and her hand becomes an object. It's no longer a part of her body, so she doesn't actually notice that the man is holding her hand. And he says that this woman is in bad faith because she knows very well what she's doing, but she's deceiving herself into believing that she doesn't know what's going on. Which I think we can see a lot of in everyday life, that we tell ourselves that we weren't aware of something, even though we really were aware, but we didn't want to be aware of something.
Can I pick up on that point? So that people can understand, this is a moment where she would perhaps need to make a decision either way, whether she rejects the advances or she accepts them, and then they move on to a relationship, maybe I think Sartre means, like perhaps a sexual relationship. But she postpones the decision by acting as if nothing's really happened, that her hand isn't really part of her, that like it's an object, like.
Yes, as if she didn't really realize, that she's so distracted, she's so in her head, she's so involved with what she's telling the man, that she hasn't even realized that the man is holding her hand. So that's kind of the way that Sartre is trying to portray it. So she's not, in a sense, she's not consciously ignoring it, but she's almost going one step further of deceiving herself. And where we can say, well, I was so distracted I didn't hear you shout out my name, or I didn't see the car coming because I was I was in my head, I was thinking about something and I didn't really see it. And this is almost what the woman is trying to do. So she's not aware that the man is holding her hand, but it's really she's deceiving herself because she doesn't want to make that decision. She wants to be able to postpone that, and the decision point has come right now, but she can distract herself from that.
So one possible translation of the French version of bad faith could be, in English we could say self-deception, but that's one aspect, I suppose, of bad faith. But bad faith isn't only that, but one aspect is self-deception.
Yes, I think that's one aspect which he highlights with this vignette of the woman in the cafe, of deceiving ourselves and pretending we don't know certain things which we have very clear awareness of them. He gives a second vignette to kind of show another side of bad faith, which is the vignette of the waiter. So he says, he's in a cafe. Sartre spent an awful lot of time in cafes. That's where he did most of his writing. So most of his books were actually written in cafes. And he says, he's looking at the waiter and he thinks, the waiter's a little bit strange, but what? I can't quite put my finger on it. Then he thinks, oh, actually, I know. He's playing a game. What game is he playing? He's playing at being a waiter. So the waiter has taken on himself this idea of waiters walk or talk in a certain way, and they smile in a certain way, and they walk up to their customers in a certain way. So the waiter is doing all of these things, not because it's who he is or what he has to do right there and then for his job, but because he's being a waiter. And this is his second definition of bad fate, where it's about we make ourselves into objects. For Sartre, he talks a lot about how we are free, we have limitless possibility, we have open choices, and that this is extremely anxiety provoking for us, that we would much rather be objects, because objects are very predictable, and a table knows it's a table, and it's only ever going to be a table, it's never going to change. And we would also like this sort of solidity. We would like to know I'm a waiter, and I'm always going to be a waiter, and a waiter is all that I am. So we take on this role, and we really limit ourselves to this role, and this is what the waiter is doing. But he says this is also bad fate, because the fact is that at any moment in time that waiter can decide that I am no longer a waiter, I don't want to be a waiter anymore, and he can make that choice, and he can become something else. But that might be a very scary choice for us to make. So we tell ourselves that actually I don't have that choice, I have no choice, this is what I am, this is what I have to be.
So by believing that there's some kind of identity, or as Sartre might put it, that he's some kind of object, like the waiter, like a defined concept, that he's no more than that, that's what he is. But by believing that, it can take away the anxiety of all the choices and all the freedom that he may have to make other decisions.
Yes, exactly. So then I don't have to make any more decisions, because I've decided what I am, and in a sense I don't really have to review that again. So that limits all the possibilities, but that is the actual fact of what makes me feel better. And another of his famous phrases is that, but actually we are condemned to freedom. We can't choose to be free. Free is what we are. We are not first born and then kind of freedom is added on to us, but we are free, and we will always have to make choices. And even when we deny our choice, even when we say, but this is who I am, this is how I was born, this is the way that society has made me, he would insist again and again that actually we have a lot of choices to make.
So that's one of his famous statements, is man is condemned to be free. So, and the way I understand that is, so condemned in a sense meaning that it's not a choice, that we can exercise freedom if we like. He's saying the reality is that we are free. It might just be that we find it hard to see that.
Yes, or I guess we find it hard to see that because we find it so scary. It causes such anxiety. And this sort of links with this idea of the universe, because linking back again to the sort of idea of God, that if God gave us a plan, then that's quite easy. But again, that doesn't make us free, because I know that I have a certain plan of some sort, of rules of some sort to follow, and that can ease a lot of anxiety, which I guess in that time kind of blended in quite well with Marxism, doesn't it, with God as the opium of the people, kind of taking them out of this. But once I accept that I am completely free, then there is a lot of anxiety, because I'm responsible for absolutely everything that happens to me, and everything that goes on for me is my choice. And he gives quite a lot of examples. So a lot of this is being written during the war, of people making choices about things going on in the war. Do I tell the Nazis what they want to hear? I didn't have a choice. They were going to torture me, so I had to tell them. Well, actually, you did have a choice. You had the choice to be tortured, but it wasn't a very nice choice. So he kind of keeps insisting on this, that it doesn't mean that choices are easy. It's not just choosing between, do I feel like watching a film, or do I feel like going out to dinner? And it's kind of an easy choice and an irrelevant choice. That choices can be very hard, but we still have the choice, and we still have to make that choice, rather than simply denying it and say I had to do this because I had no choice.
And I suppose that applies very well to modern life. I mean, the idea that we have choices, and perhaps in this age that we find ourselves in now, we're perhaps freer than we've ever been. I mean, I'm thinking about how we've got higher rates of depression and anxiety, maybe because our recording is better now, but probably because actually we've reached that level now in society where we're no longer as bound as we were in previous generations, and that can cause a great deal of anxiety, I suppose.
Yeah, because I suppose in the past that things were clear. You were born into maybe a certain social class or a certain city. You didn't really travel very much outside of that city. You were expected to kind of marry your own kind and all that sort of thing, and there were lots of expectations, and I think those people were still free in the Sartrean sense. They could all have made the choice that actually this is not who I am. I'm going to leave. This is not what I'm going to do. But maybe they felt more bound. And as we broke more and more rules and told society, actually, I want to be who I want to be, I guess that does now bring us to the place that now we do have a lot of freedom. We are constantly now told that we can be anything that we want to be, and yet that is very scary, and that is very difficult.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, in terms of, modern ideas of work and relationships and, money and the kind of everyday concerns, that on the one hand, it sounds like we're saying on the one hand, it can be difficult if we feel like we've got no freedom and we say, I can't do anything else but what I'm doing, or I find myself in these circumstances and I feel bound by them. In a sense, that's difficult. But also we're saying maybe when we see how much freedom we really have and that perhaps there are quite a lot of possibilities, that can also be quite scary too. And so people might shy away from that or just not be aware of it in this kind of self-deceptive way, this kind of bad faith way. Yeah,
and I think in Sartre's views, it would be we find it easier to deny our freedom. So we might hate it, we might complain against it, but really we prefer to be in that state. And I guess this is the victim state. It's like, I can't quit my job because I have kids to feed, and I just have no choices, and this is what I have to do. And I can, in a sense, feel hard done by in some senses. But it's better than saying, feeling that extreme anxiety of freedom of going, well, I can't quit my job, and then what? Yes, maybe then I have to go on benefits. Maybe I don't want to be. But there are those choices. And of course, there are the implications of that. And I might, after going through all the possibilities, decide, well, actually, I don't want to quit my job because it's not going to be a very good outcome if I do. But I made this choice to stay in this job. I didn't have to stay here. I decided out of all the options I had open to me, that this was the best choice that I could have made. But I'm aware that I can make other choices if I so wish. And that's, I think, where we're trying to get to, that we might stick to things that maybe aren't ideal, that maybe, in another place and time I wouldn't have chosen. But that doesn't mean that I haven't chosen it right now.
Yeah, and I think, as therapists, I suppose this is very much part of our work, isn't it? That to help people find a sense of responsibility in what they've created around them, that it perhaps hasn't happened to them, but that they've been active in contributing and shaping, influencing the things around them, even if it may seem that they've landed themselves in a certain job or in a certain relationship. That they've been very active in creating that, and in a sense that can be challenging to recognise, but also liberating in many ways.
Yeah, and Sartre would say that we are our actions. We are our choices, and for him, choices are quite active things. So this is what gives us essence. We are not born with an essence. We're just born as pure existence. And then we make one choice after another, and that builds a life, essentially. And that is the person that we are. And, again, he writes, for example, of people saying, I could have been a great writer if I had the time. I could have been a great lover if I met the right person. But he says, but you're not. This doesn't really count. It's only the actions that you've actually done that count. So what can you show for your life? What have you actually done with your life? And he picks up on the old Aristotelian idea of the acorn and the oak tree, that yes, the acorn can become an oak tree, but has it become an oak tree? So what have you really done? You could have become this, but have you become this? And perhaps you still could become this in future. Yes, if you make the choice now to commit to that. Yeah. So the circumstances up until this moment may be as they are, and to face that reality, but also that now is a time where change can occur, and from now on. So you're not predetermined. Yeah, exactly. Right? That's one of his main points. Yeah, so because we will remain constantly free. Later on, he changes some of this, and he throws in notions of what he would call facticity. So facticity are things that we are born into, givens of existence that we can't change. And he acknowledges this more in his later writing, but he doesn't deny that we still have choices. So he would say that maybe our choices are somewhat more limited, or maybe more contained, but it still doesn't mean that we have no choices to make.
Yeah. Well, once again, Patricia, thank you very much.
You're welcome.